It was a chilly evening at the Grand Mirador Hotel, a place that glittered with chandeliers and soft golden lights. The ballroom was alive with laughter, clinking glasses, and the hum of conversation that filled every corner. Guests in elegant clothes moved gracefully between tables, their smiles polite but rehearsed, their words dipped in the tone of old money and quiet pride. Tonight was the annual charity gala, one of those events where the city's richest came together, pretending to care about giving back but secretly comparing jewelry, brands, and connections. At the far end of the hall stood a grand black piano shining under the soft light. A jazz trio had been performing all evening, keeping the atmosphere lively. The pianist, a gray-haired man with years of skill in his fingertips, played smooth tunes that wrapped around the conversations like velvet. Everything seemed perfect, but perfection never lasts long. Near the buffet table stood a man named Edward Halden, a businessman known for his sharp tongue and sharper ego. He was tall, confident, and always spoke loudly enough for others to hear. He liked being the center of attention, especially when it meant reminding others that he was wealthy and cultured. He looked around the hall, judging the art pieces on display, the music, even the food, as though nothing ever met his standard. When the pianist suddenly coughed, paused and pressed his hand to his chest, a murmur rippled through the crowd. The man apologized weakly and said he couldn't continue. He had been feeling unwell all evening. The band stopped and the music faded into an awkward silence. The sudden stillness felt strange in the room full of expensive perfume and nervous laughter. A few guests whispered to each other, unsure of what to do. Without the music, the event lost its rhythm. Edward rolled his eyes dramatically. "Unbelievable," he said loudly enough for several tables to hear. "They can't even find a backup pianist for a night like this? How unprofessional." A few people chuckled nervously, not because they agreed, but because that was what people did around him. They laughed to stay on his good side. The host of the event, a kind but anxious man named Mr. Dale, rushed to check on the pianist, then turned to the microphone to explain that there would be a short break while they figured out the situation. Some guests didn't mind. It gave them more time to talk and drink, but others, like Edward, grew impatient. He looked toward the piano as if it had personally offended him. Meanwhile, in the corner near the service station, a young woman was quietly refilling trays of glasses. She wore a plain black uniform and moved quickly, trying not to draw attention. Her name was Lena. She had been working at the hotel for almost a year, mostly during big events like this one. To the guests, she was invisible, just another face in the crowd of staff. But to her co-workers, she was known for her calmness, her kindness, and the way she seemed to listen more than she spoke. As Lena stacked empty plates, her eyes drifted to the silent piano. Something in her expression changed. It wasn't curiosity or amusement. It was something deeper, like a memory stirring inside her. The way her gaze lingered on the instrument made it clear that she knew it intimately. The elegant shape, the smooth keys, the way the light bounced off its surface, it called to her like an old friend she hadn't seen in years. The room buzzed with chatter. Edward's voice cut through it again. "You'd think with all this money they could at least hire musicians who don't collapse in the middle of a song," he joked, sipping his wine. A few people laughed again, some out of habit, others out of discomfort. The host tried to smile and say something polite, but Edward continued, enjoying the attention. "Maybe one of the waiters can play something. That would be entertaining, wouldn't it?" His tone dripped with sarcasm. Lena heard his words as she walked past his table, and for a brief moment she hesitated. She glanced at the piano again. Her heart started to beat a little faster. She didn't know why, but something inside her whispered, maybe she could help. Maybe she could keep the music going. When she walked by the host's table, she leaned closer and spoke softly, almost shyly. "Excuse me, sir," she said. "If you'd like, I can play for a little while, just until someone else arrives." Her voice was gentle but steady. Mr. Dale blinked in surprise. "You can play the piano?" he asked, almost whispering, not wanting to draw attention yet. Lena nodded slightly. "A little," she said modestly. "I used to play." Before the host could respond, Edward, who had overheard her, burst out laughing. "Oh, this is rich," he said loudly, turning to the people nearby. "The waitress wants to play the piano." "That's adorable." The nearby guests chuckled awkwardly. Lena's face flushed red, but she didn't say anything. She just looked at him calmly, her hands folded in front of her. Mr. Dale frowned at Edward, then looked back at Lena. "Are you sure you can?" he asked softly, trying to be kind. "Yes," Lena said quietly. "I'm sure." Edward raised his glass and smirked. "By all means, let her try. Let's see what the help can do. Maybe she'll surprise us with a little nursery rhyme." His tone was playful but cruel, the kind of humor that makes everyone else in the room feel smaller. Lena didn't look at him again. She simply nodded to the host and walked slowly toward the piano. Every step felt heavy, as if the entire room were watching, and they were. The laughter faded into whispers. Some guests looked curious. Others looked amused. One or two seemed quietly supportive, as if they wanted her to succeed. She reached the piano and stood there for a moment, just looking at it. The surface reflected her face faintly. Her hands hovered over the keys, but she didn't touch them yet. She took a deep breath and let her fingers rest on the edge, feeling the coolness of the instrument. For a second, it felt like time had stopped, as if she were alone in the room, just her and the piano. Behind her, Edward leaned back in his chair, grinning. "This should be good," he whispered to his friends. "Watch her try to remember Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star." A few quiet laughs followed. Lena closed her eyes. She could still hear his voice, but she let it fade. Instead, she focused on the silence, on the memory of years gone by, the sound of her mother's laughter, the scent of old music sheets, the long evenings she had spent practicing on a second-hand piano that barely stayed in tune. She hadn't played in public in years, not since life had pulled her away from music and into the kind of work that barely left time to dream. But now, here she was, standing before an audience that didn't know her, surrounded by people who thought she was nothing more than a waitress. The thought didn't scare her. It almost gave her strength. She pressed one key softly, testing the sound. The piano responded beautifully, smooth, rich, alive. A tiny smile appeared on her face. Then she adjusted the bench, sat down, and placed both hands on the keys. The chatter behind her faded into a hush. Everyone seemed to be waiting, some expecting to laugh, others holding their breath. And though no one knew it yet, something extraordinary was about to happen. A soft silence filled the room as she sat down before the piano. The crowd watched with polite curiosity, unsure what to expect. A few guests sipped their drinks, others leaned forward with smirks, waiting for her to make a mistake. It wasn't every day that a waitress dared to sit at a grand piano in front of the city's wealthiest people. Lena sat still for a few seconds, her hands resting gently on her lap. She could feel the weight of their eyes on her. But instead of shrinking under it, she took a slow breath and let her mind drift to a place far away from the noise, far away from the judgment. She remembered her old teacher's words from long ago. Music doesn't ask who you are, it only asks if you feel. That thought gave her courage. Her fingers found the keys, and before anyone could whisper again, she began to play. The first note was soft, almost like a whisper itself. It floated across the room and seemed to hang in the air, clear and fragile. The next few notes followed, slow and deliberate, as if she were testing the heart of the piano. People stopped talking. Some put down their glasses. It was like the air had shifted. Edward, still sitting with his smug smile, leaned back in his chair, ready to laugh at any wrong note. But as she continued, the melody began to bloom into something unexpected, something powerful and full of emotion. It wasn't the clumsy noise he had imagined. It was music, beautiful, heartfelt, and pure. The sound grew fuller, more confident with each passing second. The way she moved her hands was effortless, graceful. It was the movement of someone who had spent years in love with the piano. Her eyes were half closed, her expression calm, almost peaceful. The laughter that had been ready on people's lips died completely. One man near the front whispered to his wife, "She's actually good." His wife didn't respond. She was too lost in the sound. Lena played as though she had left that ballroom entirely. The clinking glasses, the whispers, even Edward's arrogance disappeared. There was only the music, rich, deep, and alive. The melody spoke of joy and pain, of love and loss, of dreams that fade but never die. Every note carried a piece of her story, though no one there knew what that story was yet. The audience sat frozen. The waiters stopped moving for a moment, standing quietly near the walls. Even the sound of the city outside seemed to pause, as if the world had leaned in to listen. When Lena reached the soft, emotional part of the piece, something inside her shifted. She remembered sitting in her tiny apartment years ago, with a second-hand piano that always went out of tune. She used to play for her younger brother, who would sit on the floor beside her drawing pictures as she practiced. She remembered the day she had to sell that piano, the day her family's bills piled up and music became a luxury she could no longer afford. That memory could have broken her. But instead it gave her strength. The music deepened, her fingers flying over the keys with emotion that no one could fake. Her hands moved faster, the melody rising and falling like waves crashing against the shore. People began to sit forward, drawn in. Some guests even closed their eyes, letting the sound take them somewhere far from their glittering world of money and titles. When the final note of the piece rang out, the sound lingered in the air like a memory that refused to fade. Lena's hands stayed on the keys for a moment before she finally let them fall into her lap. She didn't look at the audience right away. She didn't need to. The silence told her everything. Then, as if a spell had been broken, the entire hall erupted in applause. It wasn't polite applause. It was loud, full of surprise and admiration. People stood up from their chairs, clapping with wide eyes and open mouths. Some were even smiling in disbelief. The same guests who had laughed at her minutes before were now cheering, shouting, "Bravo!" and whistling as though they had just witnessed something extraordinary. Lena stood up slowly and gave a small, humble bow. She didn't smile proudly. She smiled shyly, as if she couldn't quite believe what had just happened herself. The host, Mr. Dale, was the first to approach her. That was incredible," he said, his voice almost trembling. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Lena opened her mouth to answer, but before she could speak, Edward rose from his chair. He wasn't clapping. He just stood there, his face unreadable. For the first time that night, he had nothing clever to say. He had been waiting for her to embarrass herself, but instead he was the one who felt embarrassed. His smirk was gone, replaced by something that almost looked like shame. When Lena finally spoke, her voice was calm and quiet. "I used to study," she said softly. "Before I started working here. I loved the piano since I was a little girl." Mr. Dale blinked, surprised. "You studied music?" "Yes," she said, nodding. "But life took me another way. I had to take care of my family, so I stopped playing for a while." She looked around the hall, her expression gentle. "I didn't think I'd ever play again in front of anyone." Her words were simple, but they carried weight. The guests, who only moments ago had seen her as just a waitress, now looked at her differently. She wasn't invisible anymore. The applause began again, softer this time but warmer. It wasn't just admiration for her talent now. It was respect. Edward finally cleared his throat. "Well," he said awkwardly, trying to recover his usual tone, "you certainly surprised us." But his words lacked the arrogance they usually carried. For the first time, he seemed uncertain. Lena smiled politely. "Thank you," she said, not with pride but with genuine kindness. Then she turned to Mr. Dale. "Should I keep playing, or—" "Yes, please," he said quickly. "Please continue." The crowd cheered again, eager to hear more. Lena nodded and sat down once more. This time she chose something lighter, a gentle melody that danced softly across the keys, filling the room with peace. As she played, the tension that had once filled the hall disappeared completely. People relaxed. They smiled. Some even swayed slightly to the rhythm. It was no longer about class or status or pride. For those few minutes, everyone in that golden room was simply human, moved by the same music, connected by the same feeling. Even Edward, for all his pride, sat quietly, listening. His gaze softened as he watched her hands move. Maybe for the first time in years, he was reminded of something real, something that couldn't be bought or measured. When Lena finished the second piece, she stood again. The applause returned louder than before. People shouted her name. A few came forward to shake her hand, to thank her for the moment she had given them. One woman in an emerald dress wiped a tear from her eye. "You play with so much feeling," she said. "It's been years since I've heard something so beautiful." Lena smiled, touched but humble. "Thank you," she replied softly. "Music is all about feeling. I just played what I felt." As the night went on, people kept talking about her performance. The gala, which had started as just another formal event, became unforgettable. Guests whispered to each other, wondering how a simple waitress could play with such mastery. Some even asked Mr. Dale if she was a professional musician hired to surprise them. But Lena didn't stay for the attention. As soon as her part was done, she quietly returned to her duties, carrying trays again as if nothing had happened. A few guests tried to speak to her, but she smiled kindly and said, "I still have work to do." That only made people admire her more. From across the room, Edward watched her in silence. He wanted to say something, maybe even apologize, but the words wouldn't come. For the first time, he saw how small his pride looked beside her grace. The rest of the night flowed easily. The band returned later, but the audience kept asking for the Waitress pianist. Her playing had left a mark, one that would be remembered long after the lights of the ballroom went out. As the guests began to leave, Mr. Dale approached Lena again. "You reminded everyone tonight what real beauty sounds like," he told her. Lena smiled quietly and said, "It's not about beauty. It's just about playing from the heart." She wiped down a table, then glanced one last time at the piano before leaving the hall. For the first time in years, she felt something inside her come alive again, a spark she thought had been lost. Outside, the night air was cool. She walked home under the dim streetlights, her steps light, her heart calm. The sound of applause still echoed faintly in her mind. But it wasn't the applause that stayed with her. It was the music itself. And though she didn't know it yet, that one night at the Grand Mirador Hotel would change everything. The next day, the city was already buzzing about what had happened at the Grand Mirador Hotel. The story of the Waitress pianist spread faster than anyone expected. Guests who had attended the gala couldn't stop talking about her, about the way she played, the emotion in her music, and how she silenced a room full of wealthy people who thought they had seen everything. By morning, people were sharing short clips from the night on social media. Someone had recorded a part of her performance on their phone. The video showed her sitting at the piano in her simple black uniform, her eyes closed as she played with quiet intensity. The caption read, "The waitress who played like a professional." Within hours, the clip had thousands of views. People began asking who she was, but most didn't know her name. To them, she was simply the woman who made the elite fall silent. While all this was happening, Lena had no idea. She had gone home after her shift, taken off her apron, and sat by her small window in her one-room apartment. The night had felt unreal. She replayed it in her mind over and over. The music, the applause, the kind faces, and even the stunned look on Edward's face. It all felt like a dream she didn't want to wake up from. Her apartment was quiet except for the faint sound of cars outside. The only decoration on her small wooden table was a cracked photo frame with a picture of her younger brother, smiling brightly. She touched the frame gently. "You'd have laughed if you saw me tonight," she whispered, a small smile spreading across her face. Her brother had always believed in her. When they were children, he would sit beside her for hours as she practiced. He used to say that her music made everything feel right in the world, but after he passed away years ago, she had stopped playing. It was too painful to touch the piano without hearing his laughter in the background, until last night. For the first time since losing him, she had played, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. And it had felt like he was there again, sitting by her side, listening quietly. The next morning at work, things were different. Her coworkers smiled at her as she walked in. The kitchen staff clapped softly, teasing her in good humor. "The star has arrived," one of them said. She laughed shyly and waved it off. "Please don't make fun of me," she said, her cheeks turning pink. But they weren't mocking her. They were proud. They had seen the video too. "You were amazing," another coworker said. "Everyone's talking about it." "You're famous now," Lena shook her head. "Oh no, I'm just a waitress who got lucky." But deep down, something inside her had changed. Later that afternoon, the hotel manager called her into his office. He was a serious man, always focused on rules and reputation. Lena was nervous, afraid she might be in trouble for stepping out of line the previous night. But when she walked in, the manager stood up and smiled, something he rarely did. "Sit down, Lena," he said kindly. "I just wanted to tell you how proud I am. The guests were thrilled last night. I've received so many compliments about your performance. Some even called this the most memorable gala we've ever had." She blinked in surprise. "Really? I didn't mean to cause any trouble." "Trouble?" He laughed. "You did us a favor. The pianist couldn't continue and you saved the night." He paused, then leaned forward slightly. "Actually, there's something else. One of the guests left a message for you." He handed her a white envelope with her name written neatly on it. Lena hesitated, then opened it carefully. Inside was a handwritten note. Your music touched everyone in the room. I'd like to speak with you about a possible opportunity. Please contact me. Below the message was a name she recognized, a well-known music director from a prestigious performing arts center in the city. Lena stared at the paper for a long moment, her hands trembling slightly. Is this real? She asked quietly. It seems so, the manager said, smiling. I think your life might be about to change. That evening, after her shift ended, Lena sat at the small table in her apartment again, staring at the note. She wanted to call, but doubt crept in. What if it was just politeness? What if he didn't mean it seriously? What if she wasn't good enough anymore? She had stopped believing in dreams a long time ago. Life had been about survival, paying rent, sending money home, keeping things together. Music had once been her soul, but reality had pushed it aside. But something about the way the audience had looked at her last night, the way they had listened, it reminded her that maybe dreams don't disappear completely. Maybe they just wait for the right moment to come back. After a long pause, she picked up her phone and dialed the number on the note. A man's voice answered. Hello, this is the director's office. Hello, Lena said softly. My name is Lena. I got a note last night after the event at the Grand Mirador. I think it was from the director. Oh, yes. The voice brightened. He's been expecting your call. Please hold a moment. Her heart pounded as the line went silent. Then another voice came on, warm, confident, professional. Lena, thank you for calling. I was hoping to reach you. I was at the gala last night. Your performance moved me deeply. She didn't know what to say. Thank you, sir. That means a lot. I'm putting together a concert next month, he continued. We're featuring unknown talents, musicians with stories worth sharing. I think you'd fit perfectly. Would you consider performing? Lena froze. Performing? Me? Yes, he said simply. You have something rare, emotion that can't be taught. People can feel your heart in every note. That's what true music is, her voice trembled. I haven't played professionally in years. Then it's time you started again, he said kindly. Think about it. I'll send you the details. When the call ended, Lena sat in silence for a long time. Her hands were shaking, but her heart felt light. She couldn't believe what she had just heard. A chance to play again, really play, not just for a few minutes between shifts. She looked at her brother's photo and whispered, Can you believe it? For the next few days, she practiced every moment she could. The hotel allowed her to use the piano in the empty ballroom early in the mornings before guests arrived. The cleaning staff would sometimes pause their work just to listen. They said it made their mornings brighter. As her fingers found old rhythms again, she realized how much she had missed it. The smooth feel of the keys, the soft echo of sound filling an empty room, the peace it brought her heart. But not everyone was thrilled about her sudden fame. Edward, the businessman who had mocked her, couldn't stop thinking about what had happened that night. His friends kept teasing him, saying things like, You really know how to spot talent, don't you? And next time, maybe don't insult a musician before she plays. He laughed along at first, but inside he felt uneasy. He had always prided himself on being a man of taste, someone who understood art and music. But that night had humbled him in front of everyone. A week later, he returned to the hotel for another event. When he saw Lena serving at the bar again, he hesitated, then walked over. Excuse me, he said quietly. She looked up, surprised to see him. Oh, good evening, she said politely. He cleared his throat. I wanted to apologize for the way I behaved that night. It was wrong of me. Lena smiled softly. You don't have to apologize. I do, he insisted. You taught me something that night. You reminded me that real talent and grace have nothing to do with wealth. I'm sorry for underestimating you. His words were sincere, and for a moment he didn't sound like the proud man she had seen that night. Thank you, she said kindly. I appreciate that. He nodded, then added, And if it means anything, I'm glad you played. It was the best thing I've heard in years. After he left, Lena stood quietly for a moment. His apology touched her more than she expected. Maybe people really could change. That night, after finishing her shift, she sat at the piano again. The ballroom was empty, quiet except for the soft hum of the lights. She played slowly, gently, letting her thoughts drift. The melody she played wasn't planned. It came from her heart. She smiled as she played, thinking of everything that had happened. One small moment of courage had changed everything. A simple choice to speak up, to offer help, to trust herself again. And though she didn't know where this path would lead, she knew one thing for certain. She would never stop playing again. The days that followed felt like something out of a dream for Lena. What had started as a normal night at work had turned into something much bigger than she ever imagined. The video of her playing the piano at the hotel continued to spread. People commented things like, "This is what real music sounds like," and "She plays with so much heart." Some even said her music brought them to tears. At first, she didn't know how to feel about all the attention. She wasn't used to being noticed. Her life had always been quiet and simple. She went to work, came home, cooked, cleaned, and tried to make ends meet. But now strangers online were calling her the hidden talent and the waitress with the golden touch. It was both wonderful and overwhelming. One morning, as she was preparing to leave for work, her phone rang. It was the music director again, the same man who had seen her perform at the gala. His voice was warm and full of energy. "Good morning, Lena," he said. "I hope I'm not disturbing you. I just wanted to confirm. Are you ready for your first rehearsal next week?" "My first rehearsal?" she asked, still half asleep. "Yes," he said with a chuckle. "For the concert I mentioned. You'll be performing a solo piece at the City Arts Hall. It's a small event, but an important one. Many people from the music world will be there." Her heart began to race. She had almost forgotten how soon it was coming. "Yes," she said quickly. "Of course, I'll be there." "Good," he replied. "We're all looking forward to hearing you again." After the call ended, Lena sat down for a moment, her hands trembling slightly. She stared at the old piano sheet she had kept for years, a piece she had always wanted to play in public but never had the chance to. The notes were faded, the pages torn at the edges, but the music was alive in her memory. That afternoon, after finishing her shift at the hotel, she went straight to the ballroom. The staff had already begun cleaning, but when they saw her, they smiled and nodded. They knew what she was there for. "Go ahead, play," one of them said. "We love hearing you practice." She smiled shyly and sat at the grand piano once again. Her fingers touched the keys and a soft sound filled the empty hall. The world outside faded. For hours she practiced, not just to get every note right, but to feel every part of the song. There was a certain sadness in her music, but also hope. Every time she played, she thought of her brother, of the dreams she had left behind, of how life had pushed her away from the piano, only to bring her back in the most unexpected way. When she finished, one of the cleaners clapped quietly. "That was beautiful," he said. "You'll do great at that concert," she smiled. "I hope so." The days passed quickly. Each morning she worked her usual shifts. Each evening she practiced. She didn't tell many people about the concert because she didn't want to make it a big deal. She wanted to play with a calm heart, without pressure or expectations. But word somehow got around. Guests who had attended the gala started asking the hotel staff if the pianist Waitress would perform again. People sent letters to the hotel thanking her for reminding them of what true art feels like. Even Edward, the businessman who had once mocked her, sent a note of apology and a bouquet of white lilies. The note read, "Your music taught me humility. Thank you for that lesson." Lena read it and smiled softly. She didn't hold grudges. Life had taught her that kindness always spoke louder than pride. Finally, the day of the concert arrived. The City Arts Hall was one of the most respected venues in town. Not huge, but elegant and full of history. Its walls had seen performances from great musicians over the years. Now it would host a woman who had once been invisible, a waitress who simply loved to play. When Lena arrived for rehearsal, the director greeted her warmly. "You look ready," he said with a smile. She nodded nervously. "A little scared, but ready." He laughed softly. "That's good. Fear keeps us honest. Just play like you always do, from the heart." During rehearsal, she practiced her chosen piece, a mix of soft, emotional melodies and powerful, sweeping chords. The sound filled the hall beautifully. The director watched from the seats, impressed by how she connected with every note. She didn't play like someone showing off. She played like someone telling a story. When she finished, the staff and a few musicians nearby applauded. One of the violinists said quietly, "You make people feel something real." "That's rare." Lena blushed and smiled, grateful for their kindness. That night she could barely sleep. She lay awake in her small apartment, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how far she had come. From serving drinks and wiping tables to performing in front of an audience again, it felt almost impossible. When morning came, she dressed simply but neatly. She didn't want to look glamorous. She wanted to look like herself. Her hair was tied back, her outfit modest but clean. She carried her sheet music carefully as if it were something precious. The concert began in the evening. The audience filled the seats, a mix of musicians, journalists, and people who had heard about her online. The air buzzed with quiet excitement. Backstage, Lena took a deep breath. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she wasn't afraid. She was ready. When her name was announced, the crowd applauded politely. She walked onto the stage, the lights warm against her face. For a moment, she stood still, looking out at the audience. Then she sat at the piano. The first note she played was soft, just like that night at the hotel. The melody began slow and tender, then grew deeper and stronger. It was a song of memory and resilience, of pain turned into beauty. Every movement of her hands carried emotion. The audience sat in complete silence. Not a whisper, not a shuffle, just listening. Some closed their eyes. Some leaned forward. As the piece went on, it became more powerful. The rhythm quickened, her hands moving faster, the sound rising and falling like waves in the ocean. She played as if every note was a heartbeat, every sound a piece of her story. When the final note came, it echoed softly, fading into the hall. Then silence, a deep, breathless silence, and suddenly applause. Loud, genuine, endless applause. People stood up from their seats, clapping and cheering. Some even shouted her name. Tears filled her eyes, but she smiled through them. She stood, bowed once, then again as the applause grew louder. The director came on stage and shook her hand. "You did it," he said proudly. "You made everyone feel something tonight." Backstage, musicians congratulated her. Journalists asked for short interviews, and the director told her that several local orchestras wanted to meet her. But the thing that touched her most was what happened after the crowd began to leave. An elderly woman approached her slowly, leaning on a cane. She looked up at Lena with kind, watery eyes. "My dear," she said softly, "your music reminded me of my late husband. He used to play like that and with heart. Thank you for bringing those memories back to me." Lena's eyes filled again. She took the woman's hand and said quietly, "Thank you for listening." When the hall finally emptied, Lena sat alone at the piano for a few minutes. She touched the keys gently, not to play, but to thank them for giving her voice back. She knew then that her life would never be the same again. As she walked out of the hall into the cool night, she felt the soft wind on her face. She looked up at the stars and whispered, "We did it," as if her brother could hear her from somewhere beyond. The streetlights glowed softly. The world felt quiet, peaceful, and full of possibility. She didn't know what would happen next, whether she would become a professional musician or simply keep playing for those who listened. But she knew one thing for sure: she would never stop again. The music that had once been buried inside her was alive again, not just in her hands, but in her heart. That night, as she walked home, she wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a musician, a storyteller, a woman who had turned pain into beauty. And the city, still buzzing with her music, would never forget the night the humble pianist made the world stop and listen. The morning after the concert felt unreal for Lena. She woke up late, sunlight spilling through her small window, warming her face. For a moment, she thought everything that had happened was just a dream. The applause, the lights, the smiles. It all seemed too far away from the quiet room she was now in. But when she turned on her phone, hundreds of messages and notifications filled the screen. Clips of her performance had spread again, shared by people across the country. Strangers were commenting about how her music had touched their hearts. Some said they couldn't stop crying when they heard her play. Others said she reminded them that true talent doesn't need fame or money, just passion. She scrolled slowly, her eyes filling with tears. Never in her life had she felt so seen, so understood. Later that day, she went to the hotel for her usual shift. The manager greeted her with a wide smile. "You're quite the celebrity now," he said warmly. "Everyone's talking about you," she laughed shyly. "I'm still me," she said softly. Still a waitress, he nodded. Maybe, but you've changed this place. You brought music here, real music. Everyone's proud of you. Her co-workers clapped when she entered the staff room. Someone had even printed a picture of her at the piano and pinned it to the bulletin board. For the first time, she didn't feel invisible. During her break, she went to the empty ballroom again. The grand piano stood quietly in the corner, waiting. She sat down and played a gentle melody, something soft and full of gratitude. The sound floated through the hall, calm and warm. A small group of guests passing by stopped to listen. When she finished, they applauded politely, one of them even saying, "You play like someone who's lived every note." That comment stayed with her. Because it was true. Every note she played came from a story, a struggle, a piece of her heart. In the weeks that followed, Lena's life began to change little by little. She was invited to play at charity events and small concerts. People wanted to hear the woman whose story had inspired so many, yet she stayed humble. She never demanded payment or fame. She played because she loved it, because it was who she was. One evening, the same music director who had discovered her invited her to a small dinner. It wasn't fancy, just a few musicians and friends gathered in a quiet restaurant. When Lena arrived, they greeted her warmly. The director raised his glass and said, "Here's to the woman who reminded us what music truly means. Not fame, not money, but feeling." Everyone clapped. And Lena smiled, embarrassed but touched. During the dinner, one of the violinists asked her, "So what will you do now? Will you keep working at the hotel or go fully into music?" Lena paused for a moment before answering. "I'll keep working for now," she said honestly. "The piano is part of my life, but so is the place that helped me find it again. I don't want to forget where I came from." They nodded in understanding. After dinner, the director pulled her aside. "You know," he said, "there's a scholarship program for musicians who never had the chance to study properly. I think you should apply. You have the soul of a true artist. You deserve training, support, and a platform." Lena looked at him in surprise. "A scholarship?" "Me?" he smiled. "Yes, you. Think about it. You have something rare, honesty in your music. It would be wonderful to see how far you can go." That night, she walked home thinking about his words. Could she really go back to learning music? She hadn't studied theory or practice formally in years. She wasn't sure if she was ready. But a part of her, the same part that had never stopped believing, whispered that maybe it was time to try. Over the next few days, she gathered her courage and applied for the scholarship. She wrote a simple letter explaining her story, how she had once played, how life had taken her away from music, and how one night changed everything. Weeks later, she received a letter in the mail. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside was a short message. "Congratulations, Lena. You've been accepted into the City Conservatory's artist program. We believe in your talent and look forward to helping you grow." Tears filled her eyes as she read the words again and again. She couldn't believe it. Her dream, something she thought she had lost forever, was coming true. When she told her coworkers, they cheered and hugged her. "You deserve this," one of them said. "You worked hard for it." The hotel even arranged for her to adjust her hours so she could attend classes. The manager said proudly, "We'll always have your piano here, but now the world needs to hear you too." At the conservatory, Lena was nervous at first. She was older than most of the students, and her clothes were simple compared to their stylish outfits. But when she sat at the piano, the room fell silent. Her playing spoke louder than anything else could. Her teachers noticed something special about her, a depth that couldn't be taught, a feeling that came from life itself. One of them said, "You may not know every rule, but you know the soul of the music." That's something no textbook can give. Months passed and Lena improved quickly. She learned new techniques, studied theory, and practiced for hours each day. It wasn't easy. Sometimes she came home exhausted, her fingers sore. But she never gave up. She knew this was her second chance. Her story continued to inspire others. People who had seen her video still wrote to her, saying her journey gave them courage to follow their own dreams. Some were musicians, others just people trying to start over. Lena replied to as many as she could, often saying, "It's never too late to begin again." One evening near the end of the year, the conservatory held its annual winter concert. Students were chosen to perform for an audience that included music critics, artists, and families. To Lena's surprise, her name was on the list. When she walked onto the stage that night, the lights felt familiar, like they had the night of her first big performance. She looked out at the crowd, took a deep breath, and began to play. The piece she chose wasn't flashy or complicated. It was the same gentle melody she used to play in the hotel ballroom, the one that had once silenced a room full of wealthy guests. But now, it sounded different, fuller, richer, more alive. She wasn't just playing notes. She was telling the story of her journey, from the quiet waitress who hid her gift, to the woman who found her courage and let the world hear her heart. When she finished, the hall was silent for a few seconds, then filled with applause. Her teachers smiled proudly and her classmates cheered. The director who had discovered her sat in the back, clapping with tears in his eyes. Later that night, as the crowd left and the lights dimmed, Lena sat alone at the piano once again. She ran her fingers softly across the keys and whispered, "Thank you." She wasn't thanking the piano only. She was thanking life for bringing her back to where she truly belonged. Outside, snow had begun to fall. The city streets were quiet, the lamps glowing softly through the flakes. Lena walked home slowly, her heart full. She didn't need fame, fortune, or grand stages. She just wanted to keep playing, to keep sharing the kind of music that made people feel something real. And she did. Years later, her story would still be told, not as a tale of instant fame, but as a reminder that greatness can come from the most unexpected places. People would say, "Remember the waitress who played that night? She changed the way we listened to music." But to Lena, it wasn't about being remembered. It was about finally living the truth she had carried inside her all along, that no matter who you are or where you come from, your gift has a place in the world. And as she played her last notes that evening, in her small apartment, she smiled softly. The same piano that had once been a dream was now her closest friend. The same hands that had once served coffee now told stories through melody. The world outside was quiet, but her music filled it with warmth. She closed her eyes, breathed deeply, and whispered to herself, "This is where I was meant to be." And somewhere far beyond the noise of the city, her music drifted, gentle, honest, timeless, reminding everyone who heard it that even the simplest souls can hold the most extraordinary beauty.